This is a sentence we never thought we would say out loud. Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro and his wife have been arraigned in an American court. Earlier today, we saw them leaving the Brooklyn jail where they are being held. Then they climbed into a helicopter and were flown across the East River to downtown Manhattan. That's where they were escorted from the chopper and ushered into an armored vehicle. Next, they were driven to the federal courthouse in Manhattan. What happened next? I'll lay out the charges, the pleas that were entered, and the serious jail time these alleged narco-terrorists each faces if convicted. Also ahead, today, Congress gets its briefing on the U.S. seizure of Maduro and his wife. This after members of Congress were purposely left out of the mission to avoid leaks. And guess who is calling it quits? Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. He will not run again. This after a massive investigation into welfare fraud in his state. And there's even more Midwest mess. Who else is calling it quits? The judge who behaved very badly in Wisconsin and found herself on the wrong side of the law. Who is she blaming? But first, the United States is getting ready to help run Venezuela. Here is some of what President Trump said last night on Air Force One while returning to the White House from Mar-a-Lago.
Don't ask me who's in charge, because I'll give you an answer and it'll be very controversial.
What does that mean?
It means we're in charge.
Have you spoken with her?
We're in charge.
White House correspondent Mike Carter joins me. Mike?
Yeah, Greta, good afternoon. And the interim president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, sworn in today officially. Of course, the United States now in control of Venezuela, but President Trump sending a message to other regional partners over the weekend, those bad actors, the Trump administration calling out in Cuba and even Colombia now. President Trump over the weekend reiterating a warning he's previously made toward Colombia's president, Gustavo Petro, who, like Maduro, Trump says, is helping to traffic drugs to America.
Well, he has cocaine mills. He has factories where he makes cocaine. And yeah, I think I stick by my first statement. He's making cocaine. They're sending it into the United States. So he does have to watch his ass.
Well, the United States has had a long history of military interventions in Latin America, including its tacit support for the unsuccessful 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion led by Cuban exiles aimed at toppling Fidel Castro. But President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's the son of parents that fled Cuba, say that country is a failed state that the Trump administration is looking into.
Well, Cuba's an interesting case. Cuba is, not doing very well right now. That system has not been a very good one for Cuba. The people there have suffered for many, many years. And I think Cuba is going to be something we'll end up talking about, because Cuba is a failing nation right now.
Suffice it to say, Cuba is a disaster. It's run by incompetent, senile men, and in some cases, not senile, but incompetent nonetheless. It has no economy. It's in total collapse. And by the way, they were, all of the guards that helped protect Maduro, this is well known, their whole spy agency, all that were full of Cubans. I mean, it's amazing. This poor island took over Venezuela in some cases. One of the biggest problems the Venezuelans have is they have to declare independence from Cuba that tried to basically colonize it from a security standpoint. So, yeah, look, if I lived in Havana and I was in the government, I'd be concerned.
And it's not just Cuba, Colombia, and of course Venezuela, Greta. President Trump also saying over the weekend that Mexico, something's going to have to be done with Mexico. President Trump doesn't believe that Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico's president, is currently in control of that country. Instead, Trump says it's the drug cartels, and not just Mexico as well. Add Iran to the list. Today, Lindsey Graham tweeting out a picture of him aboard Air Force One with President Trump. President Trump holding a hat given to him by Lindsey Graham that said, "Make Iran great again." And we also heard from the president last night on his way back to the White House talking about Greenland once again, saying that Greenland is needed to be controlled by the U.S. for national security purposes.
Mike, tell me, there's been a lot made of the fact that President Trump says that we're going to run Venezuela. Is anybody in the United States in Venezuela now? Anyone from the White House or anyone from the military?
Not at this time, Greta. We did have Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Ecuador today. He condemned the UN Security Council emergency meeting, condemning the United States' action in Venezuela, but no troops on the ground right now. That, of course, very well could change depending on the actions of Delcy Rodriguez. But right now, it looks like the next steps will be a group of U.S. government officials working with U.S. oil interests in Venezuela and trying to formulate a government that will be more friendly to the United States.
Well, Delcy Rodriguez, who is now the sworn-in president, she said some very nasty things about the United States, and then a couple hours later, suddenly she embraced the United States. Any sense of where she is now? Is she pro-United States or anti-United States on this Monday?
Yeah, well, we did see President Trump did give an interview to the Atlantic magazine over the weekend, essentially saying Delcy Rodriguez needs to fall in line or she could get hit harder than what we saw from Maduro. President Trump pulling no punches when it comes to Delcy Rodriguez, saying she needs to fall in line or else.
And in terms of Mexico, has there been any response from Mexico?
Claudia Sheinbaum seems willing to work with the Trump administration, Greta, but at this time, there has been no offer to have what President Trump wants to see, which is the U.S. going into Mexico and taking out those drug cartels. That's been an ongoing issue that we've seen during the first year of the Trump administration.
Well, it's sort of curious that she wants to, quote, work with the United States. I mean, it's no secret that drugs have been pouring in through the southern border, coming from China, probably fentanyl, coming from cocaine, coming from Venezuela and Colombia. So, what's the sudden change that suddenly she wants to work with the United States to make some sort of effort to shut down those drugs coming in?
Well, I think she's reading the tea leaves here, Greta. President Trump, and we heard from Secretary of State Rubio over the weekend saying when this president says something, he means it. Now, there's been no sort of threats made towards Claudia Sheinbaum by President Trump as of yet, but we've seen, as what took place Friday night in Venezuela, and these new threats, veiled threats towards Colombia and even Cuba now, that President Trump is meaning action, especially when it comes to these narco drug cartels.
Mike Carter at the White House, thank you. Coming up, lawmakers are gathering on Capitol Hill for a classified briefing. What are they being briefed on? That answer when the record continues.
Federal agencies urge every family to have an emergency radio. During any disaster, electrical power may get cut. The emergency radio gives you the vital information you need. Newsmax wants you to have the Dynamo Emergency Band Radio. It doesn't need batteries and works in any emergencies. It retails for $30. You can get it with the free offer. Call or go online and get the emergency radio today. Your life may depend on it.
President Trump delivered on his promise to put America first by securing our border, unleashing American energy, and providing the largest tax cut in American history. Now Trump has delivered again by rescheduling cannabis, which was classified as more dangerous than fentanyl. Trump's action will destroy the cartel's illicit black market, expand medical research, and help American seniors and veterans safely receive care, support over 400,000 jobs, and create billions of dollars in economic growth. Thank President Trump for putting America first.
Leaf filter gutter protection helps prevent costly damage to your home, like rotting fascia, soffit, and foundation damage. But not all gutter protection is the same. Let's put them to the test. In heavy rain, these hood-style guards just can't keep up. In lighter rain, debris can flow into the gap. It's like an invitation. Don't give debris an invitation. Filter it out with Leaf Filter.
Schedule your free gutter inspection today. Call 833-LEAF-FILTER or visit leaffilter.com.
48% of Americans don't get enough magnesium, which is vital for bone, nerve, and muscle health. I recommend Cunol's magnesium glycinate. It's formulated for high absorption and is gentle on the stomach. Cunol, the brand I trust.
I wanted to have control over drinking instead of alcohol having control over me. I started with Or Health about a year ago. It put the brakes on that I had been looking for. I can drink less and say no, and it's the best feeling in the world.
Text Newsmax to 710-710 to learn more.
In just a short time, members of Congress are set to receive a classified briefing on the United States military action in Venezuela. Oklahoma Senator and members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Markwayne Mullin, joins me. Nice to see you, sir. And I guess some people say this is a military action. Some people say it's a Department of Justice action because Maduro and his wife were under indictment and that the military was just an assist. But having said that, what questions do you have?
Well, Greta, I think the case is going to be very clear. I mean, you look at Noriego's case back in 1989 when George Bush 41 did it. He was also indicted. He was also a dictator of Panama. And the argument that was made in court at that time will probably be the same argument made here. Obviously, the defense that was defending Noriega didn't prevail. At this case, they will probably use the same case law and say he was indicted 6 years ago, meaning Maduro. He was indicted 6 years ago. This is a case law that allows us to do this, which is obviously was already held up in the United States courts before. It applies in this case, which it does because the cases are extremely similar. And that's going to be the reason for moving forward. Now, personally, I think it's a great idea. I think it was wonderful that we did this because we took out a drug narco-terrorist that had been poisoning our streets here in the United States and allowing other cartels to use his ports to be able to bring these narco boats across to the United States. So I'm very supportive of what the president did here. But as far as the case law, as far as the ability for the president to sort the power that he used here, he's well within his rights to do so.
You know, I think it's less like Noriega and more like Osama bin Laden, because the United States didn't recognize Maduro as the president from that July 2024 election, and neither did a whole lot of nations. The only nations that did recognize it are his pals like Cuba and Iran. So, I mean, he wasn't he was an illegitimate head of state. And we went into Panama because Osama bin Laden killed 3,000 people, and there was an indictment on Obama. And here we go into another country, go into Venezuela to get Maduro and his wife, where they had an indictment, and he has killed thousands and thousands with his drug cartel. So I actually think it's more like Osama bin Laden than Noriega.
Right. Well, I mean, the case, I was making the case because it's in the Western Hemisphere. And so that's the comparison to what I'm looking at. But you're right. You can build this to Osama bin Laden or any other dictator that we've had to remove because of the threat directly to the United States. The fact is the president has the ability to do so. And what he did here showed it showed what true leadership, peace through strength is about. And I am very excited that this administration, underneath President Trump's leadership, is looking at our hemisphere right now. We have a lot of bad actors that's operating in our backyard. And I mean, you have Cuba not too far away. You see China's influence in Central and South America right now. You see what's happening in Mexico by them poisoning our streets. And this is just a good warning to the rest of the countries, especially what's happening now in Colombia again. This is a good warning that say, hey, you're operating in our backyard, and we're going to protect our backyard's interest.
But here's the issue that confronts us now. Is what's next, is that there really isn't anyone to run Venezuela. This woman who has been elevated from vice president to president, I don't know how we can think of her as running this country unless the military fully supports her. But there really does become a question, what's the next step for the United States? What do we do? Because that's very complex. We don't want to get into nation building. We'd like to just have someone step in who's Venezuelan and make it into a democracy. But we're sort of, we're at an important junction in this.
Well, I think there's a lot of people out there comparing us to what happened in the Arab Spring underneath Hillary Clinton's disastrous leadership in the State Department versus what's going on in Venezuela. Remember, Venezuela was a democracy. In fact, it was a shining light to the rest of the region. It was a very wealthy country, and the people there are not too far removed to be able to restore that democracy again. Those individuals that lived under the democracy before the dictatorship came in place, they are still around. And so what we want to see is that the Venezuela people take their country back and they become that democracy again. And I think that's what the president is saying right now. We're going to watch, but we're going to leave it up to the Venezuela people to choose their next government, to choose their leadership and put their country back on track. And America is going to fully support that moving forward.
Well, they have a collapsed economy, and they've had socialism since before Maduro with Chavez, which goes back more than 25 years. So I think it might be a heavy lift to expect someone from Venezuela to suddenly emerge. But we'll see. Let's hope so. Senator Markwayne Mullin, thank you, sir. And Switzerland is freezing all assets linked to Nicolas Maduro. Today, the Swiss government released this statement that reads in part, quote, The federal council decided to freeze any assets held in Switzerland and by Nicolas Maduro and other persons associated with him with immediate effect. In doing so, the federal council aims to prevent an outflow of assets. The asset freeze does not affect members of the current Venezuelan government. Should future legal proceedings reveal that the funds were illicitly acquired, Switzerland will endeavor to ensure that they benefit the Venezuelan people, end quote. The asset freeze will remain in effect for 4 years. By the way, while the United States imposed personal sanctions on Maduro beginning in 2017, the European Union has no personal sanctions on Maduro. Coming up, Minnesota Governor and former candidate for Vice President Tim Walz dropped big news today. That's next when The Record continues.
Go to balanceofnature.com and lock in 50% off for 1 year when you subscribe to the whole health system.
This isn't your average pill. This is Rose Sparks. Rose Sparks. Rose Sparks. Rose Sparks.
Rose Sparks is a fast-acting solution because it dissolves under your tongue.
Rose Sparks.
Guys, get started today.
Connect with a provider to find out if Rose Sparks are right for you.
Hey guys, Viagra is not your only option. Rose Sparks act fast and stay active longer. They aren't pills. Sparks dissolve under your tongue to reach your bloodstream for speedy results. Connect with a provider at ro.co/sparks.
When Betty and George turned 50, they figured out that switching 2 unlimited lines from Big Wireless to Consumer Cellular could save people up to $600 a year. So they made the switch and started splurging on date night. And it became their favorite night. No, don't you dare. It's an acquired taste. If you're over 50, get 2 unlimited lines for $30 each. And right now, get your second month free. Call Consumer Cellular.
Stacked in boxes filled with moments once cherished. Where do these older home movies belong today? At iMemories, we transform your cherished tapes and films into vibrant digital memories. Simply mail them in. We'll do the rest. Then, relive these perfected memories on any modern device. Your TV, computer, or phone becomes a gateway to the past. Every laugh, every step, every cherished moment, now just a tap away. Get started today at iMemories.com.
A new year brings new threats, and Cyberman's ready for every one of them. While hackers plot their next move, Cyberman's already there, protecting families, businesses, and governments before danger can strike. This year, protect what matters most with easy-to-use, award-winning protection. With PCmatic, you get American-made protection that's faster, smarter, and stronger. Start 2026 with confidence. Visit PCmatic.com today.
Ring in the new year with a kitchen designed to wow. Explore our quality kitchen cabinet collections to find the well-crafted style you want for less with 0% APR for 48 months. Hurry, offer ends soon. Only at Cabinets to Go. Designed to wow.
It's not just your hearing. For us, it's your life. That's why we created the Miracle Ear Way, offering unlimited care, including risk-free trials and free servicing to keep you connected with your loved ones at all times. Call 1-800-503-7789.
Science didn't stop at diet and exercise. Why would you? Super Beats by Human delivers blood pressure support with clinically researched ingredients because cardiovascular health is everything health. Available at your local Costco.
Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is quitting. Well, he's not exactly quitting. He's simply not seeking re-election this November 3rd for a third term. Walz made this announcement earlier today, and the decision comes in the wake of the alleged billion-dollar fraud scandal in his state of Minnesota. In making his announcement, the former Democratic nominee for vice president and current governor said this about President Trump.
Donald Trump and his allies in Washington and in St. Paul and online want to make our state a colder, meaner place. They want to poison our people against each other by attacking our neighbors. And ultimately, they want to take away much of what makes Minnesota the best place in the country to raise a family.
Walz did not take any questions after making that statement. And next month, Walz, though, may be here in Washington, Capitol Hill. He's been called to appear before the House Oversight Committee about this billion-dollar scandal in his state. President Trump responded saying in part, quote, Minnesota's corrupt governor will possibly leave office before his term is up, but in any event will not be running again because he was caught red-handed along with Ilhan Omar and others of his Somali friends stealing tens of billions of taxpayer dollars. I feel certain the facts will come out and they will reveal a seriously unscrupulous and rich group of slime balls, end quote. As for who might have his eyes, or actually her eyes, on the Minnesota governor's mansion, it's rumored that it might be current Minnesota U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar. She is not up for re-election in her Senate seat until 2030. At the 2024 Democratic National Convention, she praised Walz.
Who better to take on the price of gas than a guy who could pull over to help change your tire? Who better to serve our nation than a guy who has served in uniform? Who better to find common ground than a guy with Midwestern common sense?
Today, Klobuchar said in part, quote, Governor Walz made the difficult decision to focus on his job and the challenges facing our state rather than campaigning and running for re-election. He is a true public servant, end quote. CPAC Chairman Matt Schlapp and former Special Assistant to President Biden and former Press Secretary to the First Lady, Michael LaRosa, joins me. Michael, you know, I love when people talk Midwest common sense because I'm a Midwestern. I'm a cheesehead.
Yeah.
However, Governor Walz, boy, he totally blamed President Trump and his, quote, allies for not being a good, not watching his own state.
Yeah, I've been a little disappointed in how the governor has handled this from the beginning, by the way. He hasn't demonstrated the kind of contrition or humility that a executive officer, the executive of a state, should demonstrate when there is these prosecutions of what seems to be massive examples of government failure. State agencies, 6 to 7 state agencies that just clearly broke down and really betrayed the taxpayers with what could be $9 billion in fraud. And I haven't seen the humility and contrition from him that I would have liked to have seen from somebody who should be taking responsibility because it happened under his watch.
You know, Michael, though, and I'll go to you on this, Matt, I'm not even looking for humility from him. I'm looking for competence. He referred to himself at the debate with Vice President J.D. Vance as a knucklehead. You know, he should. You know, remember the old expression, the buck stops here? Instead, he's trying to blame Trump because he's not a good steward of the Minnesota economy and Minnesota, this money, and it's billions of dollars.
Yeah, no, I agree with this. Like, it's like the death of the apology in politics, which is even just as a tactic to to acknowledge the fact that's happened in his state.
Can an apology be enough for you?
No, but here's the thing that's also bigger, which is, let's face it, this whole question about illegal immigration, the Democrats have lost. And this is one of the reasons they've lost it, is there's a belief in this country you can come in here, break the rules, come in illegally, and that you get on the dole. And Democrats have said for years and years, no, that's not how it works. When you look in Minnesota, it looks pretty much like you can come in this country illegally, find all kinds of ways for NGOs to get you signed up for government programs. And you know what, Michael? I don't think this is popular with anybody. This idea you can come here illegally and then steal money and have some kind of paleography from an NGO.
Coming here illegally may not be his fault. That may not be his fault.
Completely his fault. It's his policy.
No. His fault. His mistake here, his fault here, is that under his watch, this horrible scandal happened.
Yes.
He wants to blame President Trump, and you're looking for humility. I'm looking for competence.
Well, it's that the competence is over. I mean, like, it's too late for competence. I mean, he has a couple months left, sure, to help clean this up, but the prosecutions are already taking place. But this doesn't have anything to do with immigration. This is a mismanagement of government. I mean, some of these people are not, first of all, are not all Somali. Second of all, they're not illegal immigrants, they're immigrants. And several of them are Caucasian. And this has nothing to do with race or immigration. This is a inefficiency of government and lack of oversight. And by the way, and the blurring
lack of oversight. It's called these are crimes.
But this is first of all, there is a blurring in the public sphere over Medicaid fraud and Medicare and, food assistance. By the way, food assistance that comes from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And a lot of the oversight was taken out during COVID under the Trump administration.
It's still
people
ultimately,
still forget.
It's still ultimately, I still blame the governor on this, even though he
you're right.
didn't even know these people.
Can I just say, look, this is the problem, which is there is a feeling in this country, and Minnesota makes it true, that you can take advantage of the system. I'm trying to make it easier on the governor by saying, hey, let's just look at the illegals, right? Because something we can all agree on. But you're right. This transcends this idea that socialism, and they call themselves socialists in Minnesota, that this is a more sympathetic approach, and it's not. What it does is it takes one hardworking person who can barely get by and says you're screwed, and some other person who's maybe not hardworking gets benefits, and it's the taxpayer money that we all pay that goes to the corrupt person. And someone should go to jail. A lot of people should go to jail.
You know what else I don't like is Senator Klobuchar, who is doing everything she can to make nice with Walz today and yesterday because she wants the job.
Right.
Instead of someone saying, look, we had hoped that Walz would be a great governor. He wasn't. This happened. Instead, she should have been silent. Instead, she puts out this lugubrious note about how great he is.
The one thing we can count on is she'll be really rough on him when it's good for her to be rough on him. Maybe right now it isn't.
I was attacked today on Twitter because I said I called him out, and Democrats need to. We hopefully we have found a new era of candor where we can have these tough conversations, and even when the office holder has a D next to their name, we should be allowed to say, this is a failure, this was a mistake, this was mismanagement, and we don't need you to run again.
Anyway, we'll see what happens if Klobuchar announces. I think she probably is. Matt, I think he probably said, give me a day or two.
I think she honestly helps Democrats in the end because she is trusted statewide.
Probably. Matt Schlapp, Michael LaRosa, thank you both.
Yeah.
And we have an update. The Wisconsin judge convicted of obstructing the arrest of an illegal immigrant has resigned from the bench. Now, you are about to look at video from April. It allegedly shows the Wisconsin judge distracting federal officers. Those federal officers were trying to arrest a Mexican immigrant outside her courtroom. Judge Dugan is seen leading the man out through a private door. Last month, she was convicted by a Milwaukee jury in federal court. Republicans had been threatening to impeach her, but on Saturday, she resigned. She sent a letter of resignation to Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers. She wrote in part, quote, I'm the subject of unprecedented federal legal proceedings which are far from concluded, but which present immense and complex challenges that threaten the independence of our judiciary. I'm pursuing this fight for myself and for our independent judiciary, end quote. The resignation stops the impeachment process, but she still faces possible jail time, a maximum of 5 years for the felony conviction, and as a first-time offender for a nonviolent crime with no prior record, she's unlikely to receive any significant prison time. A sentencing date, though, has not yet been set. Coming up, ousted Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, make their first court appearance in Manhattan federal court. That one, the record continues.
O'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
There are only a few men I'd trust with my life. Two of them built this wallet. I've known the guys behind Proof for nearly 20 years, and we've been through hell and back together. When they told me they were building the wallet, I just said, build me now, I'm in. This isn't some fashion piece. This isn't just some trend. These wallets are a direct reflection of the kind of men who built it. It's built to last, built to function, and designed to carry everything you need and more. If anything happens to it, they'll take care of it. No questions, no fine print. If you knew the guys who created this wallet, you wouldn't carry anything else. Go check them out, because they built this thing right.
WSOP presents the NFL Poker Experience. Rep your team. Compete in exciting NFL tournaments. Win exclusive NFL Poker Championship rings and collect cards to complete the NFL albums. Download the WSOP free-to-play app for a chance to win $1,000 towards your favorite team merchandise.
Wow.
Lo and behold.
I know that walk anywhere.
Welcome to the Senate Social Security. It's a privilege to see you here.
Oh, my God. If any first responder or Gold Star widow has someone die in the line of duty and they leave a young family behind, we pay every mortgage off in America.
Which is such a humane thing to do, to take care of the people that are taking care of us.
Exactly.
I'm Sylvester Stallone. Please donate $11 a month at T2T.org.
Like a relentless weed, moderate to severe Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis symptoms can keep coming back. Break away to what's possible with Tremfya. With symptom relief as early as 4 weeks, remission at 12 weeks, and lasting remission at 1 year. Some even saw visible healing of the intestinal lining. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections and liver problems may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Healing is possible with Tremfya. Ask your doctor about Tremfya today.
I'm Elmer Heinrich, the 91-year-old formulator of Immuno 150, an incredible nutritional supplement. There's nothing like it. Now, Immuno 150 is different because it contains 70 plant-derived minerals and 80 other nutrients. Dr. Linus Pauling, known for vitamin C, was instrumental in convincing me to get into the mineral business in 1983. He said the world is sick due to a lack of minerals in topsoil. He said the body needs 60 minerals, but the average food and supplement has no more than 12. That's the reason for Immuno 150. Since its inception, it's had a powerful impact on the lives of thousands of people who could not get any help from various supplements they took or their doctor. Now, I suggest you try Immuno 150 to see what 70 minerals, CoQ10, and 80 nutrients can do for you. Look at the videos on our website. Millions have. Now, consider placing an order for Immuno 150 online or call our toll-free number. I know you'll be glad you did.
Today, ousted Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, made their first court appearance in Manhattan federal court. The couple appeared in front of 92-year-old federal judge Alvin Hellerstein. Maduro and his wife are facing the following charges: conspiracy to import cocaine, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices. Maduro is also facing a charge of narco-terrorism. Maduro is being represented by defense attorney Barry Pollock. If both Maduro and his wife are convicted, each could get life in prison. Today, both Maduro and his wife pled not guilty to all the charges in the indictment. Former assistant district attorney in the Bronx and now a partner at Agnifilo Intrader LLP, Jacob Kaplan, joins me. Nice to see you again, Jacob.
Hey, Greta. Always a pleasure.
Okay, what a nightmare for the lawyers to try this case, defense and prosecution. What is the nightmare the prosecution faces? Because this is so enormously complex.
Well, there are three main issues that the prosecution is going to have to face. One is the fact that Mr. Maduro was illegally arrested in Venezuela. It's pretty clear that taking him out of there was a violation of international law. So there's going to be a lot of litigation as to what effect that would have on the case. More importantly, there's certain head of state sovereignty immunity that he has as a head of state, and that's going to be a very litigious issue going forward. Whether or not he was a legitimate leader of Venezuela, whether or not he was recognized by other countries, and whether or not he can be prosecuted for these acts. The third issue that prosecutors will have is official acts immunity, which is more limited, but also it gives immunity to certain politicians in official acts that they do as part of their job. So those are three areas I think the prosecutors are going to have to overcome in order to have a successful prosecution here.
Well, we've nabbed a lot of people in other countries and drug cartels from Mexico and prosecuted them here in the United States. I'm not even talking about the high-profile ones like Noriega, but just drug dealers that we've picked up in other countries. So I don't know why that would necessarily be illegal to do that. But anyway, as for head of state, I think that the only one who thinks he was head of state besides himself were Iran, Cuba, maybe Colombia, maybe Russia, but I mean, nobody else in the world necessarily recognizes that. And then as for official acts, selling drugs or using machine guns in a conspiracy probably is not an official act. So those things would not disturb me if I were the prosecution.
Yeah, so of those three, I think the head of state might create some issues because there are a number of countries that do recognize him as the leader. In fact, for a number of years, both the Obama and Trump administrations recognized him as a leader. So I think there is some legs to that defense. But, you know, the prosecutors will likely respond that the elections were not legitimate, and therefore he was not a legitimate leader. And if you look at the indictment, they mentioned that time and time again that he was not the legitimate leader because they're laying the groundwork to be able to respond to that likely defense claim.
Well, if I were the defense lawyer, I think my biggest nightmare would be, first of all, I have to get my client to trust me, which would probably be a heavy lift. Also, he doesn't speak English, which is another problem, which is a nightmare trying to advise your client and have your client trust you when you don't speak the same language. And I would also fear, perhaps if I represent Maduro, that his wife might cut a deal and testify against him in order to save her own neck. So it's going to be a nightmare for everybody, including the judge in this. How long do you think the trial lasts? Any guess?
Well, you know, the trial maybe a year ago of the Honduran president lasted only 3 weeks. So I don't expect it to be a long trial. It may be a long time till it gets to trial. One additional issue that the defense is going to have is visitation. Because while he's being housed at the MDC in Brooklyn, which has, you know, Mangione, had Sean Combs, had Bankman-Fried, the area where he's being held is a little more isolated, a little harder to get to, and you got to wait sometimes to be able to meet your client there.
And it's a nightmare for everybody involved. Jacob Kaplan, thank you. Always nice to see you.
Happy New Year, Greta.
Happy New Year. Now, Chevron, it's the leading private oil company in Venezuela. It's been in Venezuela since 1923. That's when Chevron began exploration activities in the Caribbean nation. In 1946, Chevron discovered their Boscan field. Right now, Chevron is working in partnership with affiliates of Venezuela's national oil company, Petroleras de Venezuela. They are working on five onshore and offshore production projects in western and eastern Venezuela. National Security Correspondent Carla Babb has the latest. Carla.
Hey, Greta. Yes, President Trump made it very clear his move to oust Venezuelan strongman Nicolas Maduro in a daring raid over the weekend now paves the way for U.S. oil companies to regain a foothold in the South American nation. Let's listen.
Venezuela right now is a dead country. We have to bring it back, and we're going to have big investments by the oil companies to bring back the infrastructure.
So all this talk of oil and deposing illegitimate leaders brings comparisons to the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 when asked by CBS what the difference was between U.S. actions over the weekend in Venezuela and the invasion in Iraq. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth had this to say.
It's the exact opposite. I mean, we spent decades and decades and purchased in blood and got nothing economically in return, and President Trump flips the script.
And Greta, perhaps the most similar move to Trump's actions in Venezuela is the U.S. invasion of Panama in 1989, resulting in the capture of Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega, who had also been indicted by U.S. courts on drug trafficking charges. President George H.W. Bush, like Trump, did not follow all the war powers requirements in Congress, but justified the action through his commander-in-chief powers. Unlike the Panama invasion, where Congress largely expressed support for the mission afterward, this time Congress appears split, with Democrats raising concerns of emboldening America's adversaries.
Russia and China just learned that all you need to do if you want to go into Estonia is to say that the leader of Estonia is a bad person. You don't even need to make a particularly good case. Look, there's no national security expert saying that Venezuela was a mortal threat to the United States 3 weeks ago.
And Greta, in 1989, Bush 1 said the use of his commander-in-chief powers was necessary in Panama to do 3 things. 1, restore democracy. 2, combat drug trafficking. And 3, defend Panama Canal treaties. This president justifies his actions with 3 things. They're going to sound similar. 1, restoring democracy. 2, combating drug trafficking. And this time, 3, retaking control of U.S. oil assets seized by Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez in 1999. But getting American companies to flock back to Venezuela could prove a massive challenge. Chevron is the only U.S. oil company there. It's been there for about 100 years. Other oil executives will need stability on the ground in a country where the industry has, as the president notes, fallen into disarray. Global opinion, Greta, could become a factor. U.S. allies are split over the American military action inside Venezuela, with the British Prime Minister saying that he sheds no tears for the end of Maduro's regime, while also reiterating support for international law. And the global market doesn't have much of an appetite for oil right now. U.S. oil prices are languishing below $60 a barrel, a level that may discourage investment. That said, Greta, Chevron stock up about 5% today.
You know, Carla, the whole idea that Venezuela wasn't a mortal threat a couple of weeks ago, I guess it's how you look at it. Because we've had all these drugs flowing in from their cocaine and other drugs from the region. It's killed thousands and thousands of people. It's destroyed families, everything. You've got that as a mortal threat. It's just been sort of, slow and baked into our culture, practically. The other is the fact that they have a collapsed economy, causing everybody who's starving to want to get out of Venezuela, go to Colombia, come up the Darien Gap into the United States. We've got people, illegal immigrants here in the United States. I mean, it depends how you define mortal threat.
Yes, and I think that that's two good points there. So one thing they'll look at is the Coast Guard saying that most of the drugs coming into the United States, all the fentanyl is coming from Mexico.
That's fentanyl. That's side of the...
And then the cocaine portion, they say most of that is coming from Colombia. The Venezuelan cocaine primarily goes to Europe. That's what we've been hearing from that. So that's that argument.
I don't know if I believe that. I think cocaine, it's a transit point at the very least.
That is the argument they're making. And then the other thing, like you said, Kristi Noem is now saying that she's going to accept Venezuelan refugees. This is kind of a flip from what we've seen when 250-some Venezuelans were sent to CCOT in El Salvador earlier this year. We found out from CBS that some of them were actually students protesting Maduro. So it's a very different turn of events now, where now they're saying, if you are protesting Maduro, if you're against Maduro, we want to support you.
Well, that would be asylum. But, the thing is, the system has been so abused and confused and ill-run and everything else. But anyway, Carla Babb, thank you. Coming up, what's up with Venezuela's new president? First, she delivered some harsh words about Maduro's capture, and now she wants to play nice with President Trump. That when the record continues.
Hi, I'm Wade Allen Root, the national TV and radio host known as the MAGA warrior and the capitalist evangelist. This presidency is ushering in the golden age of prosperity, and it's all built around making America the energy capital of the world. Enter Lost Soldier Oil and Gas. It took 40 years to piece together this 40,000-acre giant gas discovery. It's estimated to contain up to 6 trillion cubic feet of gas, with a management forecast projecting the first 25 wells alone to produce 400 million cubic feet per day of natural gas. This is how we power the AI future of America, with clean natural gas. Headed by oil and gas legend Mark Bruner, whose previous public companies delivered spectacular returns for investors. At their peaks, Pedico Energy grew about 100 to 1 for investors. Ultra Petroleum grew about 1,000 to 1 for investors. To learn more about Lost Soldier Oil and Gas, scan the QR code on the screen or go to lostsoldier.com. That's lostsoldier.com.
Don't kibble your dog.
Oh, hey, Dr. Marty.
Hey, Babb.
But what's wrong with this? It's premium stuff.
Let's check it out. It's still kibble, which means it's ultra-processed at extremely high temperatures that destroy the nutrients in the food. But at Dr. Marty, we gently freeze-dried premium meats, fruit, and vegetables, locking in their nutrients.
Never kibbled.
You got it, kid, and they're gonna love it.
Derriere, caboose, booty, badunkadunk. No matter what you call it, if you have hemorrhoids, your tushy is no laughing matter. So don't use a cream that treats your rear end like a joke. Get serious relief with Recticare Advanced Hemorrhoidal Cream. Recticare Advanced is seriously effective with 2 powerful medicines for rapid dual-action relief, soothing the uncomfortable swelling, itching, and pain of your hemorrhoids. For serious hemorrhoid relief for your buns, get Recticare Advanced.
Oh, it's cold outside. Time to protect your vehicle from winter's wrath. Of course, the hot sun can be tough on vehicles too. You need WeatherTech. Laser measured floor liners and cargo liner will shield the carpeting from sand and snow. For your interior, there's seat protector and sunshade, plus mud flaps and bump step for the exterior. Impact liner with shock absorbing rings safeguards your truck bed from costly damage. Order American-made products at WT.com. Surf's up.
Hey guys, Viagra is not your only option.
Growth Sparks act fast and stay active longer. They aren't pills. Sparks dissolve under your tongue to reach your bloodstream for speedy results. Connect with a provider at ro.co/sparks.
I still love to surf, snowboard, and of course skate. So I take Cunol Magnesium to support my muscle and bone health. Cunol's high absorption magnesium glycinate helps me get the full benefits of magnesium. Cunol, the brand I trust.
Now that Nicolas Maduro is in U.S. custody and awaiting trial, Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's vice president, has been elevated to president of Venezuela. Who is she? What's her history? Foreign Affairs correspondent Alex Salvi joins me. Alex?
Yeah, well, Delcy Rodriguez is a name that you're going to hear a lot over the coming weeks. And let's be very clear here. She is a longtime loyalist to Nicolas Maduro, but at this point, she's left with very few options following that U.S. operation over the weekend. Now, President Trump, he was talking just last night about the dynamic with the new leadership and what it's going to look like with the current transition. Take a look.
We're dealing with the people. We're dealing with the people that just got sworn in. And don't ask me who's in charge, because I'll give you an answer and it'll be very controversial.
What does that mean?
It means we're in charge.
Now, the president adding there that he has not spoken directly to Rodriguez, who quickly condemned the U.S. operation to arrest Nicolas Maduro, remarks viewed as largely being lip service to members of her own party inside of Venezuela. But she's taking a strikingly different tone as of last night, inviting the Trump administration to work together on an agenda of cooperation. The statement coming just hours after President Trump said that she could pay a very big price, even bigger than Maduro, if she didn't bend to his wishes. The 56-year-old has served in several posts since Maduro's 2013 election, most recently acting as vice president, finance minister, and oil minister. She's part of the same political party that was started by Hugo Chavez and expanded under the rule of Maduro, largely due to the actions of Rodriguez herself. Now, the U.S. sees her as a temporary but at least stable successor for the time being, given her proximity to the country's military and its security services. Trump says the goal is for Venezuela to have free and fair elections in the near future, but for now, he just wants Venezuela to implement the proper reforms and to realign towards American interests. And it appears as if Rodriguez will be the one that's tasked with carrying out those efforts, at least for the time being. And I emphasize that because a lot can change if she does not cave to Trump's demands.
But the other interesting thing, too, is the military. Everyone, does the military respect her? Does the military have any strength? Is the military headed for the, I don't mean our military, but the Venezuelan military, because they were so protective of Maduro. And does she, is she going to be able to keep them in line?
Well, I think a lot of people look at what happened over the weekend and say contextually there might be an agreement because of the fact that, for example, there were low-flying aircraft that went right into Caracas. I don't think a lot of military people would have made that risk unless they were sure that they had aerial superiority or at least a guarantee that they would not come under fire. We know that one of them did come under small arms fire. There was some damage there, but that's exactly what President Trump said about Maria Corina Machado, that she can't take over because she doesn't have the support of the government, is the way that he put it. But I think that also means military within itself.
I'd also like an explanation for why she did a 180. Why she, she said, all about Maduro, and all of a sudden, no, I'll work with the United States. I mean, what's with that?
I think that Delta Force coming into your country and kicking open the door of your boss and taking you back to the United States is very persuasive. And a lot of people, there's speculation out there, so I want to say that this isn't confirmed or anything like that, but there are questions about who exactly turned over Nicolas Maduro. We know that there were CIA assets within the government following his movements itself. Some people speculate that Rodriguez could have been the person that ultimately gave the CIA his whereabouts.
Well, I wish her luck because we need Venezuela to succeed.
Well said.
Alex Salvi, thank you.
Thank you.
Problems are not just in our hemisphere with Venezuela. Nationwide protests are in its second week in Iran. Reports of casualties are emerging despite Iran's regime's heavy crackdown on information. Middle East correspondent Zach Anders is in Tel Aviv, where it is 11:50 p.m. Zach?
Well, Greta, those digital blackouts are increasing. We're seeing a lot more disruptions to the internet across Iran, especially in some of the rural provinces where people are on some of the hardwired internets. It's very difficult to get some of the information about some of those rural areas where these protests are taking place now. Human rights groups say that the death toll has likely surpassed 20 protesters, with more than 1,000 arrested nationwide. Verified video that we are getting shows that demonstrations have now spread to at least 26 of Iran's 31 provinces. The capital, Tehran, has become the scene of nightly clashes, and videos show security forces using tear gas and water cannons and at times what appears to be live ammunition against protesters who are challenging the authority of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The unrest was initially sparked by soaring inflation and the collapsing Iranian currency. It's evolved into open defiance now, protesters chanting for an end to this regime. Now, the worst of the expected crackdown from the Islamic authorities is still expected ahead. Now, after several days of the sympathetic messaging toward the protesters from regime leadership acknowledging the economic hardships, now Iran's judiciary today vows that there will be no leniency for those arrested. They're now calling them rioters, and the Ayatollah calling them rioters and saying that these rioters must be put in their place. Now, President Trump today renewed his warning to the regime, speaking aboard Air Force One. Take a listen.
Take a look. We're watching it very closely. If they start killing people like they have in the past, I think they're going to get hit very hard by the United States.
Iran's foreign ministry quickly pushed back today at a press conference. A spokesperson accused both the United States and Israel of inciting violence and warned Iran's armed forces would respond.
Actions or statements raised by figures such as the Prime Minister of the Zionist regime or some radical American officials regarding Iran's internal affairs amount, under international norms, to nothing more than incitement to violence, incitement to terrorism, and incitement to killing with all our strength and with every ounce of our being. We are monitoring the actions of opposing parties, and in defense of Iran's integrity, our armed forces will show no negligence or hesitation.
Meanwhile, a new report out of the British newspaper The Times, which claims to have obtained an intelligence report that shows Ayatollah Khamenei has in place a backup plan now to flee Tehran for Moscow with a close circle of his associates and family. Now, if they see signs that their regime is collapsing, loyal Islamic forces deserting, defecting to the side of the protesters, and this report claims that the Islamic regime could also initiate a hurried transfer of their vast financial assets as well. Altogether, as the report finds, it could total as much as $95 billion in assets that the Ayatollah himself directly oversees. Now, various intelligence reports have stated for a while now that the 89-year-old Ayatollah has appeared frail, weaker, both mentally and physically, especially since last year's 12-day war with Israel. And the Ayatollah has rarely been seen in public since the war with Israel. In his last appearance, which was a recorded message that aired on Saturday, the Ayatollah claimed that enemy forces are looking for opportunities to try and sow unrest, not necessarily pinning the blame on the economic hardships, but this is a foreign plot, Israel and America trying to take down the Islamic regime. Greta?
Zach, as we watch what's happening in Iran, what is Israel saying about it? Because there's a huge transformation in that neighborhood. They've been Bashar, the former president of Syria is now living in Moscow. I mean, what is Israel saying about what's happening in Iran?
This is a moment where the Prime Minister is certainly, Prime Minister Netanyahu is certainly taking every opportunity to get in front of a camera and say, now is the chance now for the Iranian people. You must rise up, and we are here, and we support you. I think the real question should be, what is Israel doing? We are aware of a lot of explosions and moments of the last year or so in Iran that certainly raised eyebrows, but there has to be, based on everything that we're aware of, and especially what Israel posted the other day, the Mossad saying our agents are there in Iran doing the work with you, the people of Iran. So there's certainly something there.
Zach Anders, thank you. Coming up, why did a bunch of wildcats cross the road? The answer when the record continues.
You hear the same voices.
Donald Trump knows that's a lie.
From the same people.
Donald Trump is less lucid.
Saying the same thing.
Insults, invective, and outright lies.
And you say, enough. I'm Chris Salcedo, and I'll tell you the real news. You don't believe me? Just tune in.
I'm a martial artist, a skydiver, a pilot, and all of them require your feet to work. Get up in the morning, and it felt like I was standing on marbles on my heel. When I went into the Good Feet store, the fitting was personalized. It was all about me. You put in the arch supports and your day becomes better and the sun shines, the unicorns run by, and You know, it's a good life. I'm Randy, and that's my Good Feet story.
See for yourself with a free personalized arch support fitting at the Good Feet store.
Do you have a yo-yo smile? Sometimes yellow, sometimes white. It's a constant battle between everyday stains and whitening treatments. Until now, get Smile Actives, the daily teeth whitening breakthrough that gives you a more youthful smile and helps you keep it.
At 43 years old, I don't mess around with products that waste my time. Smile Actives is easy, and it works. No gloopy trays, no messy strips. Just add a little bit on top of your toothpaste when you brush your teeth. And ta-da, white teeth.
Just add Smile Actives to your favorite toothpaste and watch the magic happen. Our patented Polyclean microfoam lifts away deep stains for a dramatically younger and whiter smile.
You have a choice. You can have those yellow teeth and just be old Nana or Pop-Pop, or you can be smiling and dazzling and full of confidence. I love my white teeth.
Scan, click, or call for your whitest smile yet. And if you order right now, we'll double your whitening free. Get an extra Smile Actives as our free gift to you, but only while supplies last.
I drink coffee every day. I started noticing that my teeth were not as bright as I like them to be, a little dingy. The Smile Active, it works. Got your boy gleaming.
100% of users saw whiter teeth. Smile Actives lifts away even the toughest stains from coffee, wine, and food, gently restoring your bright, youthful smile. Plus, it's safe for veneers, crowns, and dentures.
It's really a no-brainer if you want to whiten your teeth.
Clinically shown to brighten your teeth 5 shades whiter in just 7 days.
If you could use something so easy like Smile Actives to take yellow teeth to white teeth, why wouldn't you?
Act now. Get Smile Actives for just $24.95 and we'll double your order. Free. But hurry, this deal won't last. Smile Actives is guaranteed to work. Whiten your teeth or get your money back. No questions asked. Don't wait. Get Smile Actives for just $24.95 and we'll send you a second bottle absolutely free. That's free shipping. A free extra bottle. That's an incredible 58% savings. Scan the code, go to smileactives.com or call to get your beautiful whiter smile now.
My wife and I had declared a bankruptcy and were rebuilding everything so that we could buy a house. The bills just kept steadily piling up. Made it hard to sleep some nights, not knowing if I was going to have a car when I came home. At one point, it even got to where we were worried if we were still going to be able to keep the house. That's when it was time to call J.G. Wentworth.
If you have credit card, personal loan, or medical debt, J.G. Wentworth's Debt Relief Program can help reduce what you owe by up to 45% before fees.
My monthly payment went from $700 a month to $380 a month.
J.G. Wentworth can help eliminate your debt in as little as 24 months.
It was actually quite easy. After I completed the program, I felt relaxed. J.G. Wentworth literally saved my marriage.
If your debt is more than $10,000, you're not alone. Visit jgwentworth.com or call 877-CASH-NOW to learn how our team of specialists can help you find a path to debt relief.
Police in Ontario, Canada captured a rare sight, a 5-member family of lynx, 2 adults and 3 kittens. According to Parks Canada, this breed of lynx are usually solitary animals. So why did the family of wild cats cross the road? To get to the other side. Chris Salcedo shows up next. Have a great evening.